Right, so at one point or another, you have probably come across some type of JSON data in your application. And in this tutorial, I'm going to take you guys through a small set of JavaScript array methods that you can use to handle the creation, updating, and the sort of general looping through your arrays that contain objects, i.e. your JSON data. This tutorial is linked to a fantastic article on FreeCodeCamp, which will be linked down in the description, and is part of a larger GitHub repo that you can find on my GitHub, which is a sort of JavaScript cheat sheet kind of thing for you guys to use and contribute to if you want. So yeah, we have just got a subset of these array methods. I've put a link down in the description as well for the W3 page that has a more comprehensive list of these JavaScript array methods, which you can check out as well. But other than that, let's jump in and get started. We are going to start off with an example of an array of cars. So you can see we have an array of objects called cars. That's the array with these little square brackets. Inside there we have different cars which are represented as an object with different attributes. So the first object, we have a purple minivan that was registered on this date and it has a capacity of 7 people. Then the next car is a red station wagon registered on this date with a capacity of 5. So you can create any object that you like and you can put them in an array. You don't have to use cars, whatever example you're working with, and you can use that in this example as we sort of go through. So now if we had to go ahead and just console.table our cars array and save that, you can see we have 2 car objects represented by represented at 0 and 1 index, a purple minivan and a red station wagon. So let's go ahead and start manipulating the data. So the first array method we're going to use is something called unshift, and all unshift is going to do is it's going to add an object at the beginning of our array. So let's go ahead and take another object and we'll call it car1, and it's a red sedan registered on this date with a capacity of 5. All we're going to do is we're going to take our cars array and we're going to call unshift like that, and we're going to put in car1, and if we console table cars again, you're going to see that where we started, we now have a red sedan inserted at index 0 at the beginning of the array. Now what we want to do is we want to add another object to the end of our array. And to do that, all we have to do is call array.push. So let's go ahead and take a second car object called car2. It's a brown SUV registered at this date, capacity of 5. All we're going to do is we're going to call our cars array and we're going to call push, adding in car number 2. And let's console.table, our cars array again, and now you can see our brown SUV is added at the end of the array. So now we want to add a car object somewhere in the middle of our array or at a particular index, and to do that we are going to use a method called splice. Now, splice has 3 parameters that you need to consider. The first one is the index, where you want to add the object. The second one is how many items you actually want to delete. It's optional. In this case, we don't want to delete anything, so we're going to put a 0. And the third one, the third parameter, is the item or object that you want to add. So if we take our car, let's call it car 3, it's a green hatchback. All we're going to do is call cars.splice, and we want to put it at index 2, or let's put it at index 3. We don't want to delete anything, so we put a 0, and we put in car 3 as our final item, as it were. So if we go ahead and console.table, console.table cars again, you can see our green hatchback is at index 3. So now what we're going to do is we are going to start looping through our array that we've manipulated to find certain objects based on certain values or conditions. And the first method we're going to use is something called find. And we can find, for example, a red car, so a car that matches a color of red. Obviously this would just be one object, or the first object in the array. And to do that, we are going to do something that looks like this. We're going to call our cars array. We're going to call the find method. And within the find method, we are going to pass in our arguments that we want. So we need to say that we're looking for a single car, as we'll just call this particular parameter. And note that I'm using shorthand now, which I think applies from ES6 onwards. So instead of writing out function in the longhand, I'm just calling the shorthand arrow function here. So we are going to say we want to find a car that matches the color, which is equal to red. Now, all we're doing here is we're creating a variable, and that variable is going to be allocated based on the find method that's running against our cars array. And so we pass in a car attribute or parameter that we want to get out of it. And all we're saying is we want a car with the color, so the attribute color, that equals red. And it's this particular array method is going to find the first item. We only have one, but it should technically only find the first item in the array. And if it succeeds, we are just going to console log red car. And you can see it's console logged the car here, and the object is obviously has the color red. It's a the color red. It's a sedan. The registration date is this, and the capacity is 5. Now what we want to do is we want to pass in a second condition using the same method. And so let's say we want to call a red, I don't know, station wagon. So all we're going to do is we're going to call the array, we're going to call the find method, and we're going to pass in our car. And now we want the car color to equal red, and we want the car type to equal station wagon. And if I just move back across here, so just like we did before, all we're doing is we're passing in the car color red, and we're also passing in the car type as a second argument. So what should happen is if we console log red station wagon, we should get the exact same object. A red station wagon with a capacity of 5, color red, etc, etc, etc. And so this particular find method is how you can search through an array and just pull out the single object that you're looking for. Now what we want to do is, instead of finding one single object, we want to look for multiple objects that match a certain condition. And to do that, instead of find, we're going to use the filter method. So if we go ahead and say let red cars, so we should technically get back 2 red cars because we have a red sedan and a red station wagon. We're going to say let red cars equal cars, calling the array, dot, filter, and we're going to pass in the car just like we did before for find, and we are going to say car dot color equals red. We'll save that. Now if we console.table, because we should get back an array, if we console.table red cars, we should now see we get back a red sedan and a red station wagon. And so filter is as easy as that to find multiple items based on whatever criteria or conditions you pass in. So now what we're going to do is we are going to transform the objects of our array using something called map. And in the first example, we are going to loop through all of the different cars in our array, and based on their capacity, we're going to return whether or not a car is considered small, medium, or large. So to do that, we are going to say let sizes equal cars dot map. And again, we're using our shorthand here with the arrow function. So we're going to pass in car, and we are going to run our conditional if statement here to determine what we return as we loop through. So at each iteration, we need to check if car.capacity is less than or equal to let's say less than or equal to 3. We want to return small. Then we want to say if car.capacity is, I don't know, less than or equal to 5. Let's say that would be medium, so we're going to return medium. And if neither of those conditionals are met, we're just going to return large, as the vehicle would be considered large. So all this is going to do is, when we call the map function over the map method over our cars array, it's going to take each iteration and put it in this car variable, and it's going to say if the capacity is less than or equal to 3, return small, which it'll add to our sizes array as it loops through, and obviously if it's less than or equal to 5, medium, or return large because it's obviously larger. So if we console.table the sizes, what we should find is we have the red sedan with a capacity of 5, medium, the capacity of 7 for the purple minivan, large, medium, small, etc, etc. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use map again, except now we're going to create a new array of objects based on the car's capacity. And so to do that, all we're going to do is we're going to say let cars properties, for example, equal cars.map, and we're going to call a car for each iteration, and we're going to open up our function. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say let properties equal capacity, and we'll just say this is the car dot capacity, because obviously we're getting the capacity from each iteration we run through, which is handled by this car object. And then we're going to say size is equal to large. And so all that's happening is if the next set of conditionals is not met, we are going to just pull back this property object itself. So all that's going to happen is we're going to add our two conditionals just like we did here, except this return large is sort of happening up here, and it'll obviously make sense now. So we're going to say if car.capacity is less than or equal to 5, properties dot size is equal to medium, and the last conditional is car dot capacity, and if that is less than or equal to 3, we're going to say properties dot size, and it's going to equal small, and after all of that we are going to return properties. And so all that's happening is just like we returned an item that came back into our array as we looped through. So as we iterated through everything, we returned medium, large, medium, etc., based on our conditional logic up there. What we're doing now is we're returning an object. So if we had no conditional logic here, all we'd be doing using the map function is as we run map over each iteration of our cars array, all we're doing is creating a new object with two attributes, one capacity, pulling it in from the cars array, and putting in a size of large. And so if we did that, we would get, or each object that would be returned would look like this with the property size of large. But what we're doing is we're saying, give us this object, create it as we run through each iteration, but check the size. And if the size is less than or equal to 5, change the size from large to medium. And if it's less than or equal to 3, change the large to small, and then return properties. And it's returning that properties object as we run through each iteration in our cars array, and it's creating a new object called cars properties. So if we console table cars properties, you can see we have a new array, and in that array we have each individual object with a capacity, which we set out over here, and a size over here, and it hits that conditional logic to determine whether or not it is medium, medium, large, large, medium, medium, etc. And that's how you can, that's just two simple examples of how you can use map, the map method, to create different arrays or objects based on a simple loop through your first set of JSON data. Now that we've looked at creating new arrays and new objects based off our current array, we're going to now look at adding a property to each object in our current array. So not creating a new one, but just adding a property to the current array that we have. So to do that, we are going to use something called forEach. And so all we're going to do is call cars, our array, forEach, and we are going to call our car. And so just like we've done before, we're going to say car.size equals, oops, large. And all we're doing is that's basically how we're going to start our conditional logic. And just like we've done before, we're going to say if the capacity is less than or equal to 5 or less than or equal to 3, change the capacity as is. So the first thing is a size attribute is going to be added to each object in our cars array, and it's going to be set to large. But if car.capacity is less than or equal to 5, car.size is actually going to change to medium. Medium. And if car.capacity is less than or equal to 3, set our car size to small. And so if we console.table our cars array, you should now see that after originally we had it up to capacity, we've added a new attribute to each object and we've set it as the capacity or size. And it's as easy as that to add a attribute to each of your objects and loop through it and even add some conditional logic in there. Right, so now what we're going to do is we want to run through our array of car objects and we want to sort them. And we want to sort them based on something like the capacity. And to do that, we are going to call the sort method, which has its own sorting algorithm that we're going to use to determine what goes where. And all it does is it evaluates and runs a comparison between two objects, so object 1 and 2. And if object 1 is less than object 2, because we're doing this in an ascending order, if object 1 capacity is less than object 2's capacity, they need to stay like that, and so we pass in a positive value, a positive 1 value. If object 1's capacity is greater than object 2's capacity, we need to swap them around. To do that, we need to give the sorting algorithm a -1. But if the two are exactly the same, so if one is car number 1's capacity is 5 and so is car number 2's capacity, we want to pass in a 0 to keep them exactly where they are as well. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say let sorted cars equal cars array dot sort, and we're going to pass in let's call it C1 and C2, which are going to represent the two objects that we compare, the current object and also the other object it's comparing to. And now we're going to run into our function. So we're going to say if C1's capacity is less than C2's capacity, we want to run our evaluation and return a +1 if it's true. We want to return a +1 if that evaluates to true. If it evaluates to false, we want to run a second comparison that says if the capacity is obviously car 1 is greater than car 2, swap them around. And if that is false, keep them as is and pass back a 0. So our first evaluation takes place here. What happens if it's true? If it's false, we're again going to do the car 1 capacity, and we're going to say if it's greater than car2's capacity, pass in a evaluated, and if it's true, pass in a -1. If it's false, it means that they're the same, the values are the same, and so we pass in a 0, and so it'll obviously keep them there. And obviously if car1's capacity is greater than car2's, swap them around because we've put in the -1, and obviously if car1's capacity is not greater than car2's capacity, just pass in a 1 if that evaluates to true. So if we console table sorted cars and we save, we can now see that purple minivan has a capacity of 7, so that sits at the top. Next is our red sedan, red station wagon, and brown SUV, all with 5s, and our green hatchback is last with a capacity of 3. And it's as easy as that to sort. And now finally, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through our array, and we're going to see if an item exists. And what we're going to do is we're going to call 2 methods to determine that. The first one is called sum, and all that's going to do is it's going to say return true or false if a particular car with a particular attribute exists, and it checks if any of the items match that. So it'll find the first one that matches, and it'll say fine, it exists, pass it back as true, and we know it exists somewhere in our array. And the next method we're going to call is every, and again, these are just 2 of many methods you can use, but every determines that all items of an array match a certain condition. And so, for example, we'll run through and say, can all cars carry a minimum of 4 people? And it should return false because I think we have one car that has a capacity of 3, so it should return to false. So let's jump into the first one, which is the sum method. And here we want to see if there is a car that exists in the array that has the color of, let's say, purple and is a minivan. So we're going to see if this exists. So we're going to say let, and we'll say purple minivan exists, and we're going to say cars.sum, and we're going to obviously call our car item as we iterate through, and we're going to pass in our 2 conditions, and we're going to obviously declare or create our 2 conditions, and we're going to say car.color is equal to, purple, if I could just spell purple, and car.type is equal to minivan, and save that. Sorry, I need to just add that. So now we are going to, let's say, console log do any purple minivans exist in the array, and we'll say where's my dollar symbol, dollar purple minivan exists. So this should come back with true. So if we save, we can see, do any purple minivans exist in the array? True. Yes, they do. And you can obviously add your own logic on top of this. So now let's let's see if using the every method, determine if every single car meets this certain criteria. So we'll say let can all cars carry at least 4 people? Perfect. So again, just naming our variables as is to make it as easy to understand as possible, which is a best practice in JavaScript. So cars.every, cars.every, and we're going to create our car, and calling our function, we're going to say and the condition we're going to pass in is car.capacity is greater than or equal to 4. So all that's saying is, as it runs through each iteration, it's going to say, does the car object, does its capacity, is its capacity greater than or equal to 4? And it'll run through it. If it hits something that can't, it's going to immediately, if it hits something, for example, where the green hatchback has a capacity of 3, it's going to immediately return a false, and we're going to know, well, that it obviously not all cars can carry at least 4 people. So we are going to console.log can all cars in the array carry at least 4 people, and we're going to return can all cars carry at least 4 people. So can all cars in the array carry at least 4 people? No, they can't, because the green hatchback can only carry 3. And that's it. It's as easy as that to use to determine whether or not an array contains something that matches a criteria, or if every single item matches a certain criteria. Right, so that covers all the JavaScript array methods that I think can be really useful when you're running with your JSON data in your application. There are obviously a whole bunch more that will be the link to that list on the W3 website will be linked down below. I've also put a link to the free CodeCamp article in the description that lets you follow along with this as well. So yeah, I hope these different methods will help you out. They were written with the ES6 syntax, so if you're not familiar with that, arrow functions and that sort of thing, that's worth reading up on as well. But otherwise, yeah, if you guys like the video, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And as always, thanks for watching.